Thank you. Good afternoon, Loudoun. This is Brenda Sheridan, Chair of the Loudoun County School Board, and I'm going to call to order the April 21st, 2020 emergency meeting of the school board to address the COVID-19 crisis. We'll go to item 2, public comment. Written public comments submitted 10 minutes prior to the start of the meeting are now being posted on the main school board webpage in a large font with the title Public Comments for April 21, 2020 School Board Meeting. Additionally, comments are posted in board docs as an attachment under the public comment section. Each meeting, the comments will be on the school board page as a temporary post, which will be taken down the following day, but the comments will remain as a document in board docs. I encourage all board members and the superintendent's cabinet to read these comments as you would listen to them at an in-person board meeting. Some information, such as commenters' address and phone numbers, have been redacted, but names and magisterial district information are posted so that board members know which comments came from constituents from your district. Move to item 3, our information items. 301, COVID-19 update on the LCPS and LCPS continued response. And I will move to Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon. I'm going to return in a moment to displaying my headshot rather than the video feed, but I wanted to explain why I'm doing that. I am proudly wearing a Tuscarora High School hat this afternoon. Last weekend, I had an unfortunate encounter with my son who was armed with electronic trimmers, and so the result didn't turn out that great. The good thing is hair grows back, but I wanted to explain why rather than sitting here with my baseball cap on, I will take away the video and just show my headshot. So thank you for indulging me. This afternoon, we will provide update on a variety of topics. And I'm going to start with providing some information on COVID-19 models and planning relating to those models. And then we'll proceed through with about a half hour, 40 minutes or so of updates before board questions and comments. So the reason I want to share a little bit of information about COVID-19 models is that it provides context for our planning for various scenarios. And last week, the state epidemiologist, Dr. Lillian Peek, provided a presentation to Virginia superintendents, drawing heavily on information from Rand Corporation Healthcare. And she presented information about different types of models. And the IHME models, she noted, have received significant press attention, but she said that other models have been particularly influential in terms of planning in Virginia. And she specifically referred to University of Virginia model and a CHIME model from Penn Medicine. And she said that the various models have different strengths. IHME models have some strengths that the others lack, but she said that the UVA and CHIME models have strengths in terms of forecasting the rate of spread that the IHME model does not have. And she specifically said that the IHME model may project the peak too early because she referenced IHME models showing hospitalizations peaking between late April and late May. Now, these are constantly being updated. And again, this presentation is from last week, so I'm referencing information that's evolving. She said that she referenced the UVA model and said that it's showing peaking sometime between mid-July to late August, assuming that physical distancing restrictions set forth by the governor are lifted June 10th. And that was just the way it was, the research model was designed. Obviously, the assumptions you make affect peaking projections. And she just emphasized that the situation's rapidly evolving. She gave a bunch of caveats, of course, in terms of the models are only as good as the assumptions that are put in. She noted that the UVA and CHIME models are expected to get more accurate in time as there's more data to enter into the model and consider in making its projections. I'll also share that we continue to participate in daily calls with county officials, and those county calls have included discussions of models provided by the Loudoun County Department of Health, specifically the director and their epidemiologist. And so in addition to continuing to receive those updates, we will continue our collaboration in terms of looking at models in a variety of ways. So for example, we have a meeting set up this week that county administrator and I are going to participate in along with others in terms of reviewing models. So I want to just again observe that the models provide context for the planning that we're transitioning to now. And so we are planning for multiple COVID-19 scenarios. And at a simplistic level, there's three basic scenarios that we're focused on. So first of all, a return to school with, a return to school without major physical distancing or other public health mitigation strategies. Or under the second scenario, it should say return to school with physical distancing and or public health mitigation strategies. And then the third scenario is an extension of distance learning, either right from the start of the new school year or after some time of in-person teaching and learning. And again, the only difference between the first two scenarios is whether or not there are major physical distancing or other public health mitigation strategies. Now, we're using these three basic scenarios to inform our planning, but I want to emphasize that the planning will be modular. So we will take modules or parts of planning for one scenario and integrate them with modules of planning for other scenarios in order to respond to hybrid scenarios. And if we can back up to the last slide, in terms of the scenarios, I just want to note that we'll be looking at really a variety of questions associated with the different scenarios. So for example, in the first scenario, and for the second scenario, for example, we'd be asking how might we assess student instructional needs and close gaps that are identified. And in the second scenario, in the scenario with physical distancing, we would ask how might school nutrition services be delivered to adhere to physical distancing guidelines. And also with each of these scenarios, we would ask what would the schedule of a student look like under this model. So those are examples of the types of questions we would consider with the scenario planning. So our aim for planning for these scenarios is to provide directional clarity. And so with directional clarity, people have an enhanced understanding of our possible pathways forward. And we want to define what success looks like for each scenario. And that will include articulating what our purpose would be in each scenario and articulating what the impact would be if we've successfully faced that particular scenario. And as we plan for scenarios, not only will we get directional clarity, but that will include identifying examples of actions that need to be taken in order to prepare for each scenario and questions that need to be answered. And I should note that the phrase directional clarity and many of the concepts, not only language, but concepts that are informing our approach to planning are drawn heavily by a book by Anthony Kim and Alexis Gonzalez Black entitled The New School Rules, 6 Vital Practices for Thriving and Responsive Schools. And in each of these scenarios, we're going to be student-centered. I gave the example of what does a schedule look like for a student as an example of a student focus. Now, obviously, we're going to also be focused on other people. For example, the health of all individuals involved are a focus in any scenario. So what we will be doing through this planning is initially building roadmaps, not detailed how-to manuals. And it's really about creating prototype responses for the scenarios. And the prototypes will be simple. We know they'll be incomplete, imperfect, but the purpose is to generate additional iterative planning. And we will start with refining the prototypes with multiple varying groups of stakeholders to get their feedback in order to inform further iterations. So we'll say to folks, hey, in what ways are we on the right track and what are we missing? And so what Anthony Kim refers to a plan and evolve approach. And what this initial iterative plan and evolve approach does is it supports continual progress without unrealistically developing a highly detailed plan in the absence of clear information. I talked earlier about how rapidly changing the situation is and how that's a challenge for models. And so putting an emphasis on having too highly detailed plans early on in the absence of clear information wouldn't necessarily be the best approach. We do, however, would need to shift to more detailed planning over time. And so the conversations with a variety of stakeholders will be key in refining prototypes and developing an eventual plan. And so examples of stakeholders that we're going to want to involve are employees in a variety of roles, parents, students, existing advisory groups, whether that be SEAC or MSAC, other entities, the school board, other community members. And that interaction is going to be significant because it will help us better understand existing behaviors, anticipated behaviors, and also what people's needs and expectations are. And so really it's about enhancing our empathy so that we can effectively design our responses to these various scenarios. And so the philosophy in approaching the input from stakeholders is on agile, iterative, informal communication, not formal bureaucratic structure. Now, also comment that the school board would play multiple roles with this, being involved along the way, but also then obviously eventually would have a role if there's policy decisions, resource allocations, and other key decisions that would be important for the board not to have input on, but to be taking action on. So the board has that dual role of providing input and taking action as needed. So I will be updating we'll provide further updates to you and the community as we proceed with this planning work and as we get additional clarity. So next, Dr. Ellis will provide an overview relating to some instructional matters, followed by Dr. Jones and Pupil Services information, then presentations relating to digital innovation, support services, human resources, talent development, and business and finance. Dr. Ellis?
Thank you. Good evening. This afternoon, I have two updates for you, one regarding synchronous learning and a second involving our planning for how students' progress in Q4 will influence final grades. Foundation of our distance learning example. This approach that we're taking goes back to the key considerations I've shared with you at the past few meetings about this topic. We truly believe the safety, health, and well-being of our students, staff, and families is top priority, and we recognize that distance learning is new for the majority of students and teachers participating. So we're in this together and we're learning together. This next slide, we've also published the recommended work time for guidelines for families. These guidelines obviously don't equal a whole school day, and we think they are reasonable guidelines at this time in the situation that we're currently in. These guidelines would change in our scenario planning that Dr. Williams just described for you, but these are our current guidelines and they have not changed from prior to April 15th. Recognizing that students, parents, and teachers are craving that face-to-face interaction, we've heard stories of teachers describing the joy on their students' faces when they were in their test Google Meets last week. And a few teachers even admitted to shedding a couple of tears when they finally got to see their students' faces. That being said, we also know that many teachers are nervous about synchronous learning. They're nervous because they are being asked to do something new and there are unknowns. It's not the same as managing a real classroom, and they're really learning how to do that. So while many students crave that synchronous time with their students, while teachers crave that synchronous time, others are really afraid to do it. So we're trying to strike a balance for all teachers and students. We've provided the guidance that you see here on this screen as a way to strike that balance. And because we recognize we are in this for the long haul, perhaps longer than originally anticipated, we are asking teachers to provide some type of synchronous engagement for students. Examples include morning meetings, brief whole class direct instruction, not to replace a full class time of direct instruction, small group lessons, and weekly check-ins. Communication guidelines still include that teachers will respond to emails within 24 hours during the work week, that teachers will provide those asynchronous learning opportunities through Google Classroom, HyperDocs, and Admentum when applicable, and that 6 through 12 teachers will have office hours for students. Our platform for synchronous instruction, as you know, is Google Meet. The EdTech team in DOI has been working closely with our friends in Department of Digital Innovation, and we really appreciate how they've been keeping up with the security features in Google Meet and updating accordingly. Last week, we made an adjustment that ensured students did not have the ability to create their own Google Meet with their LCPS credentials. We did this to provide teachers the maximum controls possible with meeting synchronously with students. So this enables us to make sure that students do not enter a meet before the teacher does, that students cannot re-enter a room after a teacher has left the meet, and that the teacher remains the host of the meet throughout the meeting in order to be able to record, to mute or unmute participants, and to remove participants if necessary. I did want to mention that staff is working on a plan that will likely include students having the ability to create Google Meets in the future. Again, going back to that scenario planning that Dr. Williams mentioned. Regarding Google Meet, I also wanted to point out that in Board Docs, you have 2 attachments that will be pushed out publicly after this evening. The first attachment is a Google Meet FAQ for teachers, and the other is a Google Meet FAQ for parents they both have frequently asked questions and information regarding how families and how teachers use Google Meet. Teachers will be recording their Google Meet synchronous sessions, and we are using Permission Click to gather parent permission to record sessions. We're doing this for a couple of reasons: to provide access for students who could not participate synchronously, recognizing that families have different priorities throughout the day, different schedules, so we're providing that option. And we're also monitoring student conduct and protecting teachers and students. So again, the Permission Click forms have been sent out. We're gathering those. And if a parent does not sign the consent for their student to be recorded, they still have options. Their child can still participate in the meeting with their camera off if they prefer, or they can wait and watch the recorded session when it's convenient. So now I'll shift to another question I know people have on their mind, and that is how we will use a student's work in 4th quarter to impact their final grade. This conversation, the next several slides, is mostly about secondary students and grading, middle and high school only. I just wanted to say that before we dive in. I also wanted to add that this has been a challenge for us. We've gotten a lot of feedback from principals and teacher leaders that show the complexity of the situation, and I'll share some of that feedback with you this evening. We're trying to move as quickly as we can while still having a thoughtful plan that takes into consideration the needs of all learners, as well as the work that we're asking the teachers to do. So the slides 15 and 16 are basically information that I've already shared as background. So this slide has the distance learning grading practices for Q3 that you're familiar with. Slide 16 has the distance learning grading practices that we published earlier regarding Q4. We've indicated that teachers will use the gradebook to provide feedback and track progress from April 15th through the end of the year. Teachers may assign numeric values for assignments in the gradebook to track progress, but ultimately no Q4 grades will be reflected on the report card, only a P for pass or N for not pass, which is different than from an F. Slide 17 shows the direction voted on by the school board a couple weeks ago that we are currently developing guidance for. And that is that teachers may adjust a student's final grade based on Q4 work done by a student if the student shows improvement or progress compared to that student's previous work. We shared this language with principals and asked them to work with their team leads to get their feedback on this as well. We gathered this information in a series of questions, and they provided their feedback. This next slide highlights a couple of examples of the questions and feedback that we've received. Again, we heard from each school, sometimes from multiple people at a school, so this is just a few highlights. This feedback was helpful as we started to develop guidance. The overall feedback, I think in general, is that schools want specific guidance and want to make sure that it is equitable for all students. So the driving question that emerged from this feedback from schools was, what steps can we take to implement this policy in a fair and consistent manner? So with that initial feedback from schools, we began drafting guidance that would move toward fairness and consistency. We started with language from the new grading policy to emphasize that grading should not be based on effort or behavior or even parent advocacy, but rather it should be based on a student's mastery of the content and competencies in the curriculum. Then we provided principals with, in addition to the previous slide, we provided principals with this specific language that in cases in which the teacher believes the student's performance in Q4 indicates a higher level of mastery of content than what was evident during the first 3 marking periods, the teacher may reference additional data to justify an adjustment of up to 10 points to the final grade after Q4. Examples of additional data might include teacher feedback in the gradebook, progress in Edmentum, or results of activities assigned in Google Classroom or HyperDocs. And then we included a reminder that final grades would not negatively be impacted, by Q4 work. I do want to say again that this is draft language. We are continuing to get feedback from principals. And I also want to point out that this doesn't necessarily cover credit recovery for students who are in danger of failing a course. Principals are working through this as well. So in an effort to continue to get specific around the guidance, we worked through a couple of possible scenarios. So this slide, this table is a couple of examples trying to articulate the rationale for the up to 10 points. So for example, if a student were to receive a 90 across the board for quarters 1, 2, and 3, their average was a 90, and they really excelled at distance learning and got what would be equivalent to, because we're not grading fourth quarter, but would be equivalent to 100 in fourth quarter. The maximum that they would be able to receive is a 92.5. So it would be a bump from a 90 to a 92.5. So we did a couple of scenarios like that to help illustrate and provide additional guidance. So we took this draft guidance, these previous 3 slides, including this table as an example, and we gave that to principals for additional feedback. And this next slide is illustrates the questions that principals have based on this new draft guidance. So some examples were, what does mastery look like? Is it a C? Is it 100%? They want to know what constitutes a specific point increase on a grade. They are wondering how we ensure grades are a reflection of a student's work and not those other things that I indicated earlier. They are wondering what concrete guidance we can provide. So we need to provide more specific guidance. There have been many questions about grading fourth quarter work, whether it should be graded or not, even if the end of the quarter ends with a pass or a not pass. And then a couple of principals threw out the idea of increments rather than points. And so I added that as an example. So all that to say, we are, the principals gave us this feedback yesterday and late last week. And today they met again to provide additional feedback in their forum times on this draft plan. Staff plans to bring you all, the school board, a plan for consideration on April 28th. And once we have a final plan of concrete guidance to give to principals, we will finalize a timeline for final grade calculations and communication with families. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis, and good evening, board. I'm pleased to share an update related to our continued support for students with disabilities through the distance learning environment and the ongoing support and collaboration with parents. As previously shared, the LCPS Continuity of Education website is available for families, as it has numerous online and offline resources that are embedded with features to provide access in digital and print formats to support families as they help to engage their students in learning activities. And we've recently created additional resource documents with information and online videos related to practical tips for parents on how to create predictable learning environments, to prevent and intervene with challenging behaviors, and also to support social and emotional needs of our students. I do also want to recognize the outstanding efforts of our special education teachers, case managers, related service providers, designees, and school teams who have been working diligently to review student IEPs and communicate with parents through the development process of our temporary distance learning plans. As you are aware, the Virginia Department of Education periodically provides updates that are related to special education and distance learning. My team and I continue to stay abreast of the latest information and updates that are provided to us by the Virginia Department of Education. And given the critical nature of COVID-19, the VDOE continues to remind us, as we do, to prioritize the health and safety of students, staff, and communities when determining how to provide special education services and also communicate with families. While we're in this together and we recognize there's no identified method or detailed guidance to adequately or equitably meet the needs of all students during this unprecedented time, our special education teachers and teams are doing an amazing job with utilizing a variety of methods to engage students in creative learning experiences, as well as communicate with families through virtual office hours, email, phone calls, and other digital platforms. The Virginia Department of Education advises school divisions to develop a plan that meets its individual needs and regulatory requirements. And although, as Dr. Ellis and others mentioned, that distance learning during school closure is uncharted territory and it's not the same as bricks and mortar in-person engagement, we have established online and offline resources the Continuity of Education website, and developed a process to provide equitable access and support for our students through the temporary distance learning plan process. We continue to comply with state and federal regulations through continuing eligibility meetings and IEP meetings during this period of school closure. But most importantly, our teachers are connecting with our students and families and are working to monitor the student progress during distance learning, along with the progress that was made prior to school closure that will be used as a point of consideration for services that are required after the reopening of schools. A few highlights about our temporary distance learning plans are they are individualized support for students. They identify the services, modifications, and accommodations that are needed. There is continued collaboration with families as an essential component, and a temporary distance learning plan is not needed if an annual IEP has already been fully proposed and addresses the individual goals, accommodations, and services a student requires during distance learning. Again, we recognize that distance learning is very different from face-to-face ongoing interactions and learning experiences that happen within a school building. And we appreciate and know that parents and guardians have many questions about the services and supports that their child will receive during this time of school closure. Our special education teachers and case managers are working diligently to engage families in the development and review of the drafts that have been developed of the students' temporary distance learning plans. Teachers and case managers have been very busy this week and last week following up with parents and guardians to seek input and consent to their students' temporary distance learning plan. And through this ongoing collaboration, teachers and support staff can also continue to discuss and work with parents about resources on how they can support their students during this time. And this ongoing collaboration is very important because we know a free and appropriate public education for students with disabilities during distance learning looks very different from what their current IEP affords them in a traditional setting. Next slide. On April 13th, we had the Professional Learning Day, as you may recall, and over 1,200 special education teachers and designees participated in synchronous professional learning session, where they were able to ask questions and receive information about the temporary distance learning plans. During last week and this week, special education teachers and case managers are collaborating with school teams and families on the development and implementation of temporary distance learning plans. While the third bullet on this slide is preliminary, approximately, and these numbers are continuing to grow and increase and change, approximately 8,370 temporary distance learning plans have been drafted to date, and over 90%, over 92% of parents, guardians, and adult students have been contacted for collaboration since April 13th. Our special education teachers and case managers are working to finalize the temporary distance learning plans this week with families. And we, the Office of Special Education, is exploring the development of an informational session to continue to support families and inform them about the temporary distance learning plans and support that is available to them. As we look ahead to June 10th, 2020 and beyond, IEP case managers have and will continue to conduct IEP meetings virtually for those IEPs that have either an expiration date between now and June 10th, and also, if requested, to do so, to convene a meeting by a parent or guardian. I will say with the temporary distance learning plans, While we are asking parents to provide consent after they provided review and input, if the parent or guardian or student adult student does not give consent to their temporary distance learning plan, the student will continue to receive access to distance learning experiences and will continue to receive support from their general educators and from their special educators as well. And at any time, the parent or guardian or adult student may request an IEP meeting instead of the temporary distance learning plan. And the teacher or case manager will make arrangements to do so and to schedule an IEP meeting that can be convened at a mutually agreed upon time and virtually or by phone. So our IEP case managers will continue to monitor progress that students are making toward each goals that are included in their temporary distance learning plan or their IEP. Slide. There are many unknowns related to COVID-19 and the governor's orders. We are continuing to monitor the Virginia Department of Education, the Virginia Department of Health, and other sources as the situation continues to evolve. And as we move closer to the end of the school year, we are considering options related to in-person and possible distance learning modules of synchronous and asynchronous learning for the provision of ESY services. It is important to note that extended school year or ESY services is not the same as summer school. Summer school services are available to all students who meet the division's criteria. However, the determination of ESY need is part of the ongoing IEP development process, and ESY services are specifically available to students with disabilities as determined by their individual IEP teams. Some students may have already had IEP teams to convene to address ESY services for the student, and a student will receive ESY services if their IEP team determines that the benefits the student had gained from services during the regular school year will be significantly jeopardized if a student does not receive ESY services. So to that point, our teachers will continue to use data collected prior to March 12th and during the distance learning period, and IEP teams will need to convene to determine if a student qualifies for ESY. And in the past years, we've had approximately between 700 and 900 students who have participated in ESY services. We anticipate more students with disabilities may need ESY services given the school closure. And again, individual student IEP teams will need to determine that for each child. There's been much discussion regarding teacher assistant support and behavior assistant support to our teachers and to our students. We are collecting feedback from principals to determine how and if teacher assistants are currently engaged to support distance learning. And in some schools, our teacher assistants, behavior assistants are indeed participating in virtual classrooms, assisting teachers in whole group and small group activities, assisting with monitoring and answering questions during synchronous learning, as well as gathering resources to help teachers with lesson plan development. I'm pleased that DDI and Pupil Services are in the process of providing Chromebook devices to our special education teacher assistants, and I will pass it along to Mr. Shivert, who will expand upon that process.
Hello, everybody. Next slide. So I'd just like to remind the board the current technology distribution model does not include funding for special ed or teacher assistants and behavioral assistants. There are a number of Chromebooks that have usable life and are in good working condition that we repurposed for special education TAs and behavioral assistants. So again, as As Dr. Jones stated, we are working collaboratively with the Department of Pupil Services to ensure that all eligible staff receive access to an assigned device in a safe and efficient way. Next. So I've shared this chart before, but this is kind of our deployment process chart. We have completed and are down to step number 3 or area 3, to where we're scheduling and distributing devices. So we hope to be able to start as soon as tomorrow. Next. So again, here are the identified special education teacher assistants and behavioral assistant staff who were identified throughout the process. So we're looking at being able to make Chromebooks available to 937 staff. Next. Logistically, we're operating out of the hardware repair center. We have made additional appointments available for them to be able to come to the hardware repair center. An appointment takes approximately 5 to 10 minutes for us to assign the device to the staff member, update the inventory, and provide them with instructions or answer any individual questions that they have. The special ed TAs and behavioral assistants received an email today with instructions to schedule the pickup as their schedule permits. Next. We will continue with this rollout. We anticipate that it should take roughly 2 weeks to complete. These pupil services staff will continue outreach to their staff to ensure that each staff member is provided a device or has declined to receive a device because they may have one that they would prefer to use instead. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Lewis.
Good evening, everyone. I have a really quick update for you with the meals program. I'll start with 375,000 meals. That was yesterday's number. I'm happy to say that today, just before this meeting started, we were up to 390,000 meals served. And that also includes just over 3,300 food bags that are part of our ongoing partnership with Loud and Hunger Relief. I'll also say that we're expanding that partnership with Loud and Hunger and are coordinating some more deliveries with their vehicles at some of our schools as well. So we continue to look for ways to provide more and more services to the folks that need it in the county. Regarding the 3D printing of the face shield frames, I'm happy to report we've been working with the leadership team from not only LCPS, but also with the County of Loudoun, and includes the General Services, the Office of Emergency Management, as well as the library folks. And so we have put out a survey to make sure we have the right equipment. After determining a design, we have found that certain pieces of equipment will do better than others. And I will also offer there that we had one of our LCPS teachers that had done some homework and found a simpler, cheaper, easier, faster process to make these. And so we're implementing that as we move forward, which will help us with our efficiency moving forward. And then we are looking towards here in the next few days, gathering up the machines that will provide the services that we need and put them in a single centralized location and get staffing up to speed and start printing. So we're looking forward to that beginning early next week, if not up to the end of this week. And that, I only have one slide, so I will turn to Dr. Ziegler.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for this opportunity to update the board on HRTD operations, and to piggyback what Mr. Lewis said just a second ago. Some weeks ago, HRTD pledged to provide relief and support to the operations, especially with distribution of food operations. And we had some close to 500 substitutes who volunteered to take place in that. And we have provided about 30 substitutes who have gone out and reinforced Mr. Lewis's troops who are on the ground providing those meals to students. So we're very proud of that work. Next slide, please. During this time of uncertainty, providing staff members and teachers with feedback takes on a new relevance and importance. Many of our staff members are unsure about their job responsibilities now. They're unsure about how to move forward, and our teachers may be unsure about delivering effective virtual instruction and will look to their principals and managers to facilitate growth by providing feedback that is timely, relevant, and actionable. Providing feedback to teachers during the COVID-19 shutdown, principals have a unique opportunity to have a profound impact on student achievement. Moreover, principals and teachers who work collaboratively will ease the adjustment to virtual instruction and help teachers quickly adapt to this new environment. Teacher feedback during the COVID shutdown should be viewed as a means to improve instruction, foster teacher reflection, and to acknowledge the difficulty of the adjustments we are making. And my comments tonight are focused mainly on teachers in this brief update, but HRTD is providing a set of guidelines and best practices to provide feedback and complete evaluations for all employee groups during the COVID-19 shutdown. And so as part of that, we were wrestling with how to do this. And we're guided by these principles that you see displayed here, that the transition to virtual learning and virtual work has been and continues to be stressful and challenging for many employees. We are encouraging principals and evaluating managers to be understanding and flexible in providing feedback to teachers and employees. Feedback during the COVID-19 shutdown will be non-punitive in nature. We were encouraged to adopt a model similar to what DOI has adopted for students, and say that summative evaluations will be based on data collected prior to March 11th. Data collected after March 11th may be used to enhance a teacher's evaluation, but may not be used to score down a teacher. And we're looking at ways to fairly incorporate data collected after March 11th for employee groups that are still working. We believe that providing feedback to teachers is essential to the teacher's continued professional growth and development, and will have a profound impact on student learning. Providing feedback helps to ensure our mission, the mission of the division, continues during the shutdown, and it also helps us to ensure compliance with LCPS policy and the Code of Virginia, which require formal evaluations for all administrative, instructional, and classified staff. And one that we've added this afternoon as we continue to work on this document is we want to help principals and managers to recognize exemplary performance through the evaluation system or through other means as we see heroes and superstars arise during the COVID shutdown. Next slide, please. One of the things that we've been doing in HRTD is making sure that we are able to continue regular operations. And so since March 11th, I thought it was important for the board to see just how hard that we've been working. We have to date, and this number changes every day, but to date have completed 495 interviews across all job categories. All of these have been held virtually. And these are both screening interviews, which are done with 2 interviewers, and second round interviewers, which are done with fuller panels. We've held 6 job fairs. We've had 2 that we've hosted, the LCPS Elementary Virtual Fair and the LCPS Open Virtual Fair. And we have also virtually visited Christopher Newport University, University of Maryland at College Park, James Madison University, and Ohio State University. In the coming weeks, we will visit Virginia Commonwealth University, a job fair, a national fair sponsored by the American Associations for Employment and Education. We will have a special education job fair, and we will visit Penn State. We're continuing to make offers for FY21. To date, we've made 69 offers since March 11th. 63 have been accepted, only 5 have been declined, and 1 is still pending. And onboarding sessions started yesterday in the virtual environment. We had some logistic challenges we had to work through in order to onboard folks for the FY21 school year, but we currently have 133 new employees ready to onboard with us. And one of the things that we're most excited with, and we will announce this with greater fanfare very shortly in the future, is of our teacher cadets who are graduating this year, 54 have indicated that they would like to accept an employment offer, a future employment offer with LCPS that will activate when they graduate from college with their teaching credentials. And we have to date processed for FY21 562 job postings. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Willoughby.
Thank you. I just have 2 items to give an update on. The first item is going to be related to refunds. And so a couple meetings back, I gave an update on refunds for families, and there were a couple school board members that asked about an automatic refunding of fees and charges versus a request process that we initially had come up with. And so we were able to take this suggestion and develop a process to automatically refund the fees and charges to the families. A communication was sent out to the public on April 13th. And we have already processed a large number of credit card refunds, and check refunds are being processed, and we hope to have those checks sent out soon. The refund processes that was previously communicated related to the student meals and the facility rentals remain in place. The next item I wanted to briefly update on is more of just a reminder of what you can expect for next week at next week's school board meeting. We are working on a revenue update. The General Assembly's veto session will occur tomorrow. And we also have had more sales tax collections. And so this will assist us in projecting our revenues. So we are working on that revenue update, and we'll have that to share with you on the 28th. Also, we are working on the reconciliation documents. And as a reminder, that includes a list of the recommended reductions. We're also working on a list of the possible reductions and items that are not being recommended for reduction. And then also a listing of all the new positions that is in the FY21 budget. We have also received some questions from school board members, and we are working on those responses as well. And that is all that I have for today.
And that concludes our overall presentation for the board.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, and to all of your cabinet for the presentation. We're going to start with our round robin questions, ask board members to do 2 each, and then we'll come back through until we're finished. Ms. Reeser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I will start with Ms. Willoughby, since she's most recent in my mind. When will the list of reductions be available for board members to review?
So we are working to finalize those reports, and I believe it is our intention to try to have something sent out later this week, but definitely in advance of the meeting on the 28th.
Okay, and my second question for you, and maybe it's probably more of a request for you to think about when we start discussing the 3 scenarios for next year as potentials. I think as a board, it would be helpful for us to hear your recommendations regarding budgeting possibilities for things like CTLEP or the COVID pay, as well as being able to provide part-time employees or long-term substitutes the one-time benefit that, or benefit's probably not the right word, but the exception that we made to paying part-time employees. Is that something that you envision we would be able to continue to do if there are future school closings in the next school year?
Okay, I will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mahadavi.
I guess I'll probably go back to Dr. Williams. I think, Dr. Williams, you mentioned about the roadmap. I think it sounds like a great idea to have an agile modular roadmap based on those 3 different scenarios that you'll be working through that. I guess, and the question would be: is cost? Are you going to factor in how costing will play into different model too? Perhaps again, depending upon if we continue with distance learning going into the next year, how is, again, we've done well as a school administration so far with ensuring that we've been paying our non-classified, classified, all employees. But going forward, if this sort of continues and extend, are you also factoring in how, as a school, we adjust with the newer scenario, newer paradigm, and the costs, again, whether there's plus or minus costs associated with that?
Yes, and that relates to, I believe that relates to the comment and question that Ms. Reeser was making as well, in terms of the budget implications of different scenarios. And so in discussions with the board, we will talk some about that. At a simplistic level, there are some additional expenses, of course, with distance learning, but then there's also savings. And there is some level of flexibility for changed expenditures within budget categories, while recognizing that significant decisions we would want to seek board action on, and has been referenced to income replacement, and that's an example that even though the money might be budgeted for, based on the conversations we've had with the board so far, that's an example of something that we would certainly want board action on. So that's my short answer, but I would envision additional conversations with the board as we move forward.
Okay. And my second question, I think, is going to be a little bit, I know the answer from Mr. Shriver is going to be, I hope all of our LCPS systems are updated with the latest patches and the latest offering from the vendors, and we're not behind any of them. I just want to make sure that we are obviously, not obviously, but explicitly making sure that that's the case.
Mr. Mahedady, we are on the appropriate patch for all systems. Not necessarily the latest patch, but the appropriate patch.
Yeah, thank you. That's all, Chair. 2 questions right now.
Thank you. Ms. Corbo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Dr. Ellis. I'm wondering if you would be able to share the student distance learning engagement data, any information that you might have to let us know how students are engaging.
Yes, ma'am. So we plan on sharing measurements of student engagement at the regular board meeting next Tuesday. I did put in board docs for you to preview a summary of Edmentum usage from last week. So when you look at it, keep in mind that it is only 3 days worth of work, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, when we're engaged in new learning. And also, I'll just add that some schools rolled out at different rates, and some schools started with Edmentum on the very first day on Wednesday, excuse me, and others waited until this past Monday to begin. So if the numbers in one school look particularly low, that's probably why. It's only three days worth of data, but it does give you an idea of the kind of data we can get from Edmentum. And when I share with you more engagement information on Tuesday, next Tuesday, we will include information regarding Google Classroom as well.
Great, thank you. My next question is for Mr. Shriver. I'm wondering if there are instances where there are technology issues or programs are dropping or students are dropping. How are you notified about that, or is it up to a teacher or parent to contact DDI?
There is no way for DDI to know whether or not an end user is having technical issues unless they report them. So we would expect either the student and or the parent or the teacher to either call or send an email or log the incident through our web portal, as is our normal process.
Okay, I just know that sometimes, if you're a teacher, you're thinking that somebody else is taking care of it or somebody else might be aware. So I just wanted to make it clear that it's the responsibility of teachers or whoever the end user is to make sure that they contact you to let you know what's going on to help them.
Sure. Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Sirotkin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Corbo stole my first question, so I'll just move down my list. So, Dr. Jones, I was writing it down fairly quickly, but I think the metrics are over 8,300 TDLPs drafted with 92% of parents contacted. Do you have any metrics at this point in time for how many parents or guardians have signed the TDLPs at this point?
Yes, again, this is a very preliminary information, but we're seeing of those that we have received, about 35% of the parents have followed up with consent. And for those that have not provided consent, that's less than 0.5% of those who have responded.
So I'm about 35% have signed it, less than 0.5% have responded but not signed it, and the rest have the vast majority have just not responded at this point in time.
That is, there's still collaborations.
I see.
Having more information when we follow up for next week's update.
I see. Thank you. And then for Mr. Ziegler, I understand based on the numbers that you provided, I understand where we are now and what we've done with regards to hiring for next year. But can you provide greater insight on where we are compared to last year or previous years as far as hiring? Are we behind where we normally are, or do we expect there to be a higher than usual vacancy rate on the first day? And if so, what are we doing to try and mitigate that?
Sure. So I will pull the exact data for you. History tells us we hire about 800 people over the course of a summer. This year, we're not anticipating a greater vacancy rate on the start of school for 2021, but I will pull comparative data from the last couple of years and compare it with where we are this year.
Thank you, Dr. Ziegler.
Thank you. We'll move to Ms. King.
Yes, I have two questions. One is for probably Dr. Williams or Dr. Ellis or both. But in looking at your outline for how to grade Q4, which I think has gotten it's well done, getting more feedback, and it's not finalized yet because it does get complicated. But my understanding, and this is what I want a correction for, basically that students will not, grades for Q4 will not negatively impact students. They could help them, they could raise their grade, but not negative. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. The work that a student does in Q4 cannot negatively impact their final grade.
Okay, good. And then I think this is probably for Mr. Vincent, but I'm not positive, but this deals with the Edmentum. And I've heard from several people that they're having difficulty with it. Parents were saying that their child goes on and they're trying to select in Edmentum what they need to be reading or looking at, and it's at the high school level and not at the lower level. This may just be a permission, but also students are in a classroom on Edmentum and the teacher says, watch this video. When they bring up a new window, it kicks them out of Edmentum. So this may just be permissions, or it may need to be some coding changes in the software, but I wanted to know, are you aware of this? And are you looking at it?
So half of that. Yeah, Dr. Ellis.
Sorry, I was just going to say I'll take that. So yeah, the short answer is yes, we are aware of what you described. We have heard from a couple of families and a couple of teachers regarding the concerns you described. And DOI is working with Edmentum to work through those issues. We are also working on communication to teachers, particularly the middle school teachers, and particularly middle school social science are the specific concerns that we have heard of. We're providing them additional guidance and support, and have scheduled regular touch points with the department chairs, the subject area lead teachers or the SALTs, and other lead contacts in the school. So we'll have weekly check-ins with them to troubleshoot issues, and we're also working with Edmentum as well.
And I have a question. I'm not sure who this would go to, but I know we have a hotline, and we also have a web link for people with concerns or questions. Do we have any information on how that is being used? Are people using it?
Mr. Doolittle.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We are logging all the calls and messages we receive through the FAQ page. They average a handful of questions and contacts each day. And depending on what the question is, we're collaborating with subject matter experts in the departments across the division to provide the best information we have available about whatever the issue is that's raised.
Okay, I'm just wondering if maybe the principals could send out to their parents for the different schools just a very simple email, just reiterating the hotline number and the web link for, getting questions, concerns in. Make sure that, sometimes things get confusing for all of us because there's a gazillion amount of information coming in, and maybe something more simple, straightforward.
Yes, ma'am. We can reach out to the principals and remind them of the resources and ask them to promote them through their communication with their family. Happy to.
Okay, thank you very much. That does it for me.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Beatty.
Thank you. I guess I'm not sure. I'll direct this question to Dr. Williams. So I got a number of emails about people concerned they're exempt employees and they're not receiving hazard pay. Can you speak to that? Specifically, why wouldn't they be getting hazard pay when they have to also be out there distributing Chromebooks? And that's kind of the context that I've got. I don't know if there's other exempt employees that are working in situations that put them in hazardous situations. So if you could speak to that, and perhaps as Mrs. Willoughby as well.
So generally speaking, if someone is assigned to work at a actual physical work location, and they are not exempt from federal overtime regulations, generally speaking, classified employees, but then they're going to be eligible for the emergency pay. If someone has questions about that, they should contact their supervisor. But Ms. Willoughby, what else would you say, both in terms of the substance of eligibility and the resolution process for any concerns?
I would say that you've summarized the distinguishing factor between the exempt and the non-exempt. In terms of any concerns, I would say what you described of elevating through their supervisor, as well as, and then I could work with Mr. Ziegler and Human Resources, and we could look further into it, but it has been based off of the FLSA guidelines.
So these are all federal regulations that would prevent us from compensating people more if they're working in a dangerous environment.
Well, Mr. Beatty, it'd be helpful to understand, is there a specific type of role that you're referring to? Because there are some local decisions, but I guess I would ask about the role, because So, for example,
Yes, there-
digital innovation positions are going to be considered to not be exempt and therefore eligible. There might be examples of digital innovation positions or titles that are considered exempt. And so we are doing it in accordance with federal guidelines. Ms. Willoughby could correct me if I'm wrong, but it could be a local decision if you as a school board wanted to say, we want to do that for all employees, but that's not what we had recommended or what the board had approved. But Ms. Willoughby, am I correct that that would be a local decision in terms of the compensation?
I guess I can answer your question. The position would be digital experience lead and digital experience coordinator.
I think that is something we could look into further in terms of, as Dr.
Yeah,
the local decision, and then also in terms of potential cost impacts related to that.
But Ms. Willoughby, are you saying you also want to do further review on my comment, or would you agree that that's a local decision?
I think I would want to look a little further into it.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else, Mr. Beatty?
Yeah, and then another question someone asked was, is it possible to provide instructional videos or screenshots to help our parents when we model adapted home learning plans? And this is specifically for students with IEPs. So not the TLD, the transition distance learning plans, but just if they've got that working environment, what other resources can we provide to parents to help them as they are now take on that role of educator at home?
So, Mr. Beatty, we have provided a number of educational videos or links to educational videos on the Continuity of Education website. And as parents and guardians are communicating with their teachers and case managers, if they would ask specific questions of where they might need some additional supports, we might already have that available and can point them to the right direction, or it may be something that we are in the process of developing.
Okay, thank you. I'll respond with that then. That's it for me, Ms. Sheridan.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Morse.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Williams, in order to execute on the first day of school, supposing it's the last week of August, what do you see as the decision date on which scenario we need to pursue, knowing that staff and teachers will have to prepare potentially differently, very differently, depending on the outcome of the scenario selection?
We plan to take it as part of our scenario planning at decision timeline. So that's an example of a question that we've identified, and we'll return to the board for conversations on that.
Okay, given the turmoil and our movement through the summer, board members, it may behoove us to forego the July break and to have a board meeting or board meetings necessary to assist with decision making in July. So I'd like to potentially put those on the calendar as placeholders, depending on what other board members feel. And Madam Chair, that's up to you, of course. Second question I have is, students who don't have an adult at home are not able to do synchronous learning one-on-one with the teacher. Is it possible that if a student is unable to get an adult due to a situation at home, is it possible that we could find either a staff member or a dean or somebody who would be able to interface to ensure that we do have that third person in the one-to-one synchronous learning environment? Have we given any thought to that, Dr. Ellis?
I think that's a great question, Mr. Morse, and I will look into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Great. We'll move to Ms. Bartz. You unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. You're muted again, Ms. Bartz.
Now, good?
Good.
Can you hear me? Okay.
So I have a question of Dr. Williams. In your webinar, you spoke to informational sessions for parents as far as a focus on our special education students and families being a priority. So I noticed Dr. Jones referenced a potential session. Where are we in that process? When can families look for outreach and a date for those type of sessions, informational sessions?
Dr. Jones?
Yes, I am currently in the process of identifying the platform and have a tentative date scheduled for next week. We certainly are aiming to add at least 1 week notice, and that session would be publicized with the help of our friends in the Public Information Office. So I do anticipate something next week.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. I also have a question regarding SEAC. We talked about facilitating our May session and making sure that they were able to meet. What is the outlook for that so far?
Very similar to the information session, we're identifying the platform. That is a very complex platform, but I anticipate that we will be able to facilitate that. I do have a regularly scheduled meeting along with Dr. Nelson with the SEAC chair and vice chair scheduled for tomorrow, and we'll hopefully have information for them at that time.
That's my two questions. You can come back to me.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ellis, we did hear about social studies in the curriculum, and somebody already addressed it with it being the same for middle school and high school. Just in general, if people are having issues with Edmentum, whether it's teachers or parents, doesn't matter what the subject matter is or what the issue is, what is the best method for people to get the issue resolved and to report the issue?
So if parents and students are having issues, I would recommend reaching out directly to the classroom teacher. If teachers are having issues, I would recommend reaching out, first loop in their principal and lead teacher, whether that's the department chair or the SALT at each level. And then the teacher leaders would work through the content offices. So in the case of social studies, they would work through the supervisor and specialist of social studies. And I mentioned earlier that the content offices are scheduling regular weekly touch points with those teacher leaders. And so that's the best route for teachers to go if they're having trouble.
Just for clarity, I just want to make sure I understand, in order to get the information to who needs it the fastest and most efficiently and from all aspects is to push it up through the chain.
Yep, through the teacher leader to the content offices.
Okay, thank you.
And I do have, I'm sorry, Ms. Sheridan, I do have specific guidance going out to the social studies middle school teachers. It's going out either this evening or tomorrow because that is the specific example that I have heard that's come directly to my office.
Right, that is the only one we've heard in addition to just difficulty in general, but I just wanted to know because obviously something could happen in the next few days too as more schools are signing on and using it. My second question is we've received a lot of inquiries from and really about virtual Loudon and the offering of that and the price. Can you speak to that at this time?
I can tell you that it is on our list of things we are talking about and planning for. We are planning for various summer scenarios and into the fall. And one of the discussion points is the cost of virtual Loudon and making sure that it's affordable for families, particularly during this time. So I don't have any concrete answer, but it is on our radar and part of the discussion for summer school options.
Great, thank you. And we'll look forward to any future updates on that subject. And just to answer Mr. Morse's question about the potential for meetings in July that we don't regularly schedule, as we get a little closer, we'll certainly poll board members in case we are able to do things throughout the summer and restrictions are lifted to ensure we have availability, and then also coordinate with staff in the progression of any roadmap planning so that we can sync it up. So I'll get back to board members about that. Okay. And then we're going to circle back to Ms. Reeser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Ellis, I think that as far as our neighboring districts go, we may be the only one that's doing both synchronous teaching and presenting new material. So I just want to thank your department for being able to tackle both of those very big asks. And I know that the next 7 weeks, well, it might be 6 now, but for the rest of this school year, you guys have quite a lot on your plates. And my questions, I will try to confine to just this school year for now so that we don't get ahead of ourselves. With regard to quarter 4, the presentation today, I noticed talked about the possibility of having a pass or a not pass for quarter 4. And I believe that that's the first we've heard of that. Is that correct?
No, that has been shared previously. And I will reiterate what has also been shared previously is neither the P nor the N for not pass would be included in the student's final grade.
Okay, but it will be reflected somewhere.
It will be reflected somewhere, and the purpose of that is to track student progress and to support our locally awarded verified credit process. So we need that information internally, but it won't be a part of the final grade.
Okay, so it will be recorded internally. Will it also show on a report card?
I do not think so. Let me confirm that, but I do not think that it will show on the report card. Quarter 4 will be blank.
Because I do know that we always intended to record grades and to track progress. And that was actually one of the big reasons why using that data to adjust grades seemed simple enough. And actually on the topic of the SOLs being locally verified and awarded, in your presentation, you talked about concerns that principals had regarding how are we going to demonstrate mastery. Isn't it true that they're going to need to do that in order to award the locally verified credits anyway?
Yes, ma'am, and that will be done through Edmentum and supported by Google Classroom and HyperDocs.
Okay, so I guess my second question would be, do we normally provide this level of guidance in assigning grades? I mean, there's a lot of discretion, and we trust our teachers and our schools to be able to take that responsibility on. So seeing, I think there was a couple of slides with long lists of bullet points of questions, it seems, I'm just wondering, is that typical for the amount of guidance that our principals or teachers ask for in determining grades?
I would say that it is typical when something new is presented to them, and the concept of we do have a grading handbook. The grading handbook does not address how a non-graded period of time could influence a graded period of time, and that's the guidance that we're working through, and I think that's the guidance that schools are seeking right now. It seems to them that it's a little gray area, and so that's the specific guidance that they're seeking.
Okay, so just for clarification, is it truly a non-graded period of time if we were always going to track marks to determine a pass or a not pass and to award the locally verified credits?
It's a non-graded period of time because it won't be reflected as part of their final grades. We are assessing and gathering feedback, though.
I see what you mean. So you mean there isn't like a numerical assignment to the work?
Exactly.
Okay. I'll just reserve my other questions for the next round. Thank you.
Mr. Mahadevi?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for Dr. Williams or Mrs. Ziegler. So I know, Dr. Williams, I think next week you'll be presenting us the options of $60 million reserve that been asked for by the Board of Supervisors. And then also knowing that perhaps the situation going into next year would be perhaps, I mean, we don't know that yet, but I think it might be challenging. So how are we managing, again, there's always a discussion I also heard about the growth has to continue, but enhancements perhaps can take a seat back, and I'm sure you'll present all that. But the new hiring that we're doing, how is that being factored into how we're looking at the budget, not only for this year, but for going forward? Perhaps this is a very broad question, Dr. Williams, I understand that, but maybe you can speak to a little bit about that as far as the new hires, how are they going to fit into our plan to make sure that we are, we have to be lean and mean going into not next year, perhaps 2 years from now. So how are we thinking about that to make sure that we are staffed appropriately? At the same time, we're also being very prudent about how we do the new hires and try to manage with what we have right now.
So at this point in time, we're not proceeding with hiring for positions that are first-time budget in FY21 as that are enhancement positions. And as we make budget decisions, that would inform future hiring. Dr. Ziegler, are there other comments you would add?
So the hiring that we're doing now is based on growth attributed to student growth, which is a net gain in students, and also our regular attrition that occurs after each school year. So none of the enhancement positions, as Dr. Williams has said, are being hired for. And there's a couple of other categories in the budget as it was adopted that we are also not hiring for. So enhancement, replacement positions, all of those are frozen. And we're working very closely with the Department of Business and Finance to make sure that our list and their list are reconciled so there's no inadvertent hiring of positions that may be frozen or may not continue for next year.
And I would also comment that Mr. Sirotkin had asked about our pace of hiring compared to previous years. And so even though we are currently proceeding with filling growth-related teaching positions, there's still enough unfilled positions to provide flexibility should we need it in the area of growth-related positions. So given the importance of hiring quality teachers, we've not stopped that hiring, but should we have if a decision were made to not hire teachers needed for growth, and I'm not saying that there's going to be a recommendation to that, but if a decision were made, there's still some flexibility at this point in time.
I think that was my last. Thank you. I think the last statement covers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to Ms. Corbo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Dr. Ellis about reading. I'm wondering what type of support that we plan on providing for students that are struggling with reading, and also students that we know are struggling with reading and maybe have language barriers. How and what types of support are we giving those students?
So that support will look different based on the needs of the student. I'll share that we have reading teachers who are supporting and collaborating with classroom teachers to support students. Additionally, we have EL staff, our English learner teachers, and staff from the central office providing support and collaborating with classroom teachers as well to support students.
So we know that a lot of our, I'll go back to the struggling students that are struggling to learn how to read in our elementary schools. We have a lot of parents that have reached out to us with that concern, knowing that our data and statistics say that, if kids aren't reading on grade level by the end of third grade, 2/3 don't catch up. And so is our reading department coming up with a plan to address the needs of those specific kids or students?
They are working with the other content supervisors and with the reading teachers to support students. Yes.
Right. So those parents should expect and anticipate someone to directly reach out to them about their students and come up with a plan to help support them.
I would recommend working with their classroom teachers to provide the support they think their students need.
So if I have a student who is struggling to read, then as the classroom teacher, I need to support that, or is our reading team going to create some sort of an intervention plan and support?
Are you talking about? I think I understand your question, and it would be a collaboration with the reading team.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to make sure that, if students were already receiving reading services, that didn't fall again on the classroom teacher to solely provide support, and to make sure that we are implementing our reading task, our reading team to continue to reach out to those students and to continue to create some sort of distance plan for those for that specific need. And
yes, ma'am. Yes, and the reading specialist will receive specific guidance on how to do that.
Okay, I've just had a lot of parent questions about that, so I appreciate you addressing that. I was also wondering if there has been an update on our MATA classes and our certification programs. Have we had an update on how we're going to be supporting those students?
We were working through certification questions earlier this week and late last week, and I can provide you, I'll need to get back to you with specific information regarding credentialing.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Sorokin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Ellis, I had a chance just since the last round to go and take a look at the data on board docs you mentioned as far as the student engagement with distance learning. So just looking at the breakdown by school, I would expect naturally a variation from school to school and from different regions within Loudoun for a number of reasons, but there's a couple there that just seem like perhaps it's missing data or data that wasn't entered correctly into the system. For example, like at Lunsford Middle School, and I realize it's only based on a few days of data, but at Lunsford, it's only counting 38 students and having logged into Edmentum when other schools just a mile or two down the road have 10 times that number. So I'm hoping it's just a matter of missing data, but I was curious whether it's something you've had a chance to take a look at yet and figure out whether there's issues at individual schools or whether it's just a data issue.
So I don't think it's a data issue at this point. I do think it is a matter of when the schools decided to start using Edmentum. Several schools used Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week to get their students really comfortable with Google Classroom and HyperDocs, and were preparing their students for Edmentum and launched yesterday. So I am anticipating the data to even out when we look at this entire week's worth of data, not just the past 3 days from last week.
Okay, thank you. And I like I said, I realized it was only based on a couple days worth of data. So I'm interested to see what it looks like once there's another week or two of distance learning behind it. But that explanation makes sense. And then the only other thing I have is the biggest complaint I've gotten, and I don't know how systemic it is, but the complaint I've gotten more than any other is just as far as the amount of coursework that some teachers are assigning in going far beyond the recommended 30 minutes per class or the guidance for that specific grade level. So I understand that naturally that just even in person instruction, there's just different styles among teachers and differences in coursework that's assigned. But given the challenges around student schedules and other concerns related to distance learning, I'm wanted to see whether that's something you're tracking and if that the guidance and recommended levels is something that can be reiterated.
I appreciate that feedback. I had not heard those concerns. We do talk with principals though about balancing the the guidance with teacher autonomy and making sure we're staying within the guidelines. And the guidelines are certainly something that we can reiterate and have principals work with their teachers to monitor.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move to Ms. King.
No questions.
All right, Mr. Beatty.
No questions from me, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Morse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question for Dr. Jones. The TDLP in your slide presentation said is not needed if the IEP has already been proposed, but not if the IEP has been accepted. Can you explain why we're aligning it to the proposed IEP and not the accepted?
Yes, I'm getting to my slide, and that is, if it's been, if it's fully proposed and it has been accepted, then a temporary distance learning plan is not needed.
So when you say fully proposed, that means that the parent has accepted it and signed the IEP, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Bartz.
I have a question regarding the laptop rollout for our TAs, our teacher assistants. It looks like there's 937 staff members. How many laptops do we actually have?
Ms. Bartz, I don't have that information off the top of my head, but we're using repurposed Chromebooks that were in schools that had not reached their
Mr. Shivert, we're getting a lot of feedback. Could you repeat your answer?
Yes.
Ms. Corbo, can you mute? There you go.
I helped. I'm sorry. So your question was, how many laptops do we have? So I don't have that information off the top of my head. We are using and utilizing repurposed devices that we're pulling out that had previously been in classroom in those buildings that went one-on-one.
You're starting that tomorrow.
Yes.
And what level? Are we talking elementary, middle, or high? What school's getting that first?
Ms. Bartz, they're all being notified, so they can come get them and sign up for an appointment at their.
Okay.
Up to that individual. It's up to that individual TA or behavioral assistant to schedule time to come pick up their device.
And if they all wanted it, do you have enough to meet that need?
Yes, ma'am. We're prepared to hand out 973.
Oh, good. Oh, that was my biggest question. So you have enough. Okay, good.
Yes.
Now, oh, good. That was my concern. So going back to, and this may be Dr. Jones' question regarding the laptop. So our special ed assistants have never had a laptop. We've never given that to them. And now that we are giving them this product, this tool, what is it going to look like as far as their assistance with our special ed students? Because Dr. Williams was on the webinar where it talked about what other school systems are doing, and he referenced now that we have are giving out these laptops, these Chromebooks, we will be moving forward. So what is the goal of now that we have an additional person that has the capability to work with our students? What's that going to look like from a distance learning perspective?
So although the teacher assistants have not had a personal laptop assigned, I trust that many of them have utilized and worked with students with their Chromebooks while school was in session. And from the survey information from principals in working with teachers and teacher assistants who are currently working and engaging in a distance learning environment, that looks like anything from assisting teachers through whole group and small group instruction, or assisting and monitoring questions that might come up during the Google Classroom or read alouds, that type of thing.
will they be working with students that they typically, you know, how when they're in the classroom, they have particular students that they work with? Will that be the students that they work with in this environment?
Yes, that would be the expectation, that they're working with teachers they typically would prior to school closure to support the students that they typically would support.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Of course, that does not stand within the way of them helping other students as the need may arise.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any questions at this time. We'll go back to Ms. Reeser, and board members for this third round. If you have a question, could you raise your hand electronically and I'll go right to you. If your hand isn't up, I will skip over you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So getting back to Dr. Ellis, the final grade calculations, that the slides that you presented talked about the possibility of 10 additional points. And I tried to take some notes as you were going. I just want to make sure I understood correctly that the 10 points would not be added to the final grade to raise it 10 points. It would be part of the calculation in creating the final grade. So it would be before the division, really. Is that right?
Well, first of all, I just want to be clear that this is still draft and we're still working through all of this.
Sure.
The way that it was described on slide 20, it would be an adjustment of no more than, so up to 10 points to the final grade. And then slide 21 described caveats to that. So if a student got a final grade of a 90 before considering fourth quarter, it would be up to 3 points.
Okay, that's a much better way of saying what I was trying to get at in shorthand. So it's not that an 85 would become a 95 or
no,
up to a 95. Okay. Yes. And the final framework that you come up with that we will be reviewing on the 28th at our meeting, when will the information be available for board members to review? Because obviously reviewing it the day of it's difficult to give meaningful feedback.
I would love to get it to you as quickly as possible. Like I mentioned, the principals met again today to provide additional feedback. So I hope to have it Friday at the end of the day, Monday at the latest.
Thank you. And then I just, my second comment would be regarding what Mr. Sorokin brought up. It was actually in my notes to also let you know that as of today, I had a couple of emails where parents shared with me from different schools that their children are getting work that's exceeding the cumulative hours that we are targeting. And my response to them was it's going to be a little bit hit or miss in the beginning as teachers are figuring out how long these kinds of virtual assignments and such may take kids at home in a different setting. So what is the best way to continue to provide feedback, if that's the case, obviously, to the teacher? But I imagine that as a division, we would like to know if this is happening broadly.
Yes, so I would recommend that parents work with the teacher if they are feeling that their children are working well beyond the time limit. I do appreciate your comments about it being difficult in the beginning and figuring out how long certain activities take. I think some of that will level out as we all get a little bit better with distance learning. And again, we will work with the principals to monitor the time guidelines and to make sure that schools are working their best to remain within those guidelines.
Thank you.
So I will gather that information from the principal.
Thank you.
Great. We'll go back to Ms. Bartz, as her hand is the only one that's up.
Okay. So I have a question. I need to unmute myself. Am I?
You're good.
Okay. I have a question. So as far as utilizing our school-based staff that is teaching staff, such as athletic trainers, our athletic directors, nurses, clinic assistants, even our deans. How are we utilizing, or what is our future plans to utilize them over the next 6 weeks? And even maybe going forward next fall if this continues.
So I will jump in and speak to a couple of situations that I'm aware of, and then invite others to as well. In the example of the athletic directors, for example, currently they are doing a lot of the work that they would be doing. They're interviewing candidates. They are attending virtual meetings with their supervisor rather than face-to-face meetings. They're attending virtual VHSL meetings as well. So a lot of that work has shifted to the virtual environment. VHSL has a lot of required forms that they need to fill out, so that work continues, and they are attending professional development that they would have attended possibly in person in a virtual environment through webinars. Athletic trainers are following up with injured athletes through their parents, through phone calls with their parents. They're continuing to review injury data. Obviously, they don't have their daily activities that they're watching and supporting, but they are meeting with coaches and continuing conversations. What that looks like long term is a question that we will certainly need to work through in the scenario planning.
And our nurses and our clinic assistants, what are their roles right now? How are we utilizing them?
We have been very appreciative of their efforts with supporting our current staff through the Chromebook distribution, our staffs that are in our food services with monitoring and providing support regarding physical and social distancing. Also, there's work that whenever there is a request from the health department related to a potential COVID-19 contact, they have been very instrumental in providing feedback and support through that effort. And then as we gear down and gear up for school, there are a number of responsibilities with student health records that they can certainly do and are working through remote.
Thank you.
All right, I couldn't tell if you were finished, Ms. Bartz.
I have more questions, but I'll wait till my turn.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Ms. Reeser, whose hand is up as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two questions for Mr. Ziegler. First, I'd like to thank you for your comments about giving feedback to teachers at this time, not negatively impact them. It is a Herculean effort that they are going through to come up with new lesson plans and a fully new way of teaching. And I don't think we can say enough about that. My question for you with regard to the 54 cadets is, would you please remind me how that compares to how many cadets we had commit last year to coming back and teaching at LCPS?
So this is the first year for the rollout. So it's 54 more than zero. Whatever percent.
I did not I had heard so much about the cadet program all throughout the last year that I did not realize that we had not hired that way before. So I appreciate that. And my second question is how long does it typically take for us to do a background check on a new employee?
So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and that's one of the issues that we're still working on, is how to properly onboard somebody fully. So now we can do all of the paperwork up to fingerprinting, and we're still trying to figure out a way that we can safely fingerprint people during the COVID shutdown. And it really varies based on the individual person, the quality of fingerprints, and they can come back in a matter of hours. And with some employees, it takes a matter of weeks, and it's really difficult to predict what the holdup is. It just is, it varies from individual to individual.
So it can be a matter of hours to a matter of
weeks, yes. And then sometimes it's easy to assume that when there's a delay that there's going to be something wrong in that person's background, but we find that there's no pattern to the length of time that it takes.
Sure, that makes sense. It probably has more to do with whether they've ever had a background check before. And Miss Sheridan, I had 2 pieces of feedback to share. Would you like me to wait until Ms. Bartz has a turn, or go ahead?
Go ahead. And then just so Mr. Morse knows, I do see your hands up as well, Mr. Morse.
Thank you. So the other 2 pieces of parent feedback I had were, one was a request, whether it would be possible to, well, let me back up. Both of them came from, compiled from a variety of emails where some parents appreciated very much having lots of information, but they had so many emails and so much information that they actually couldn't find a way to sift through it and make meaningful use of it. And so the first suggestion was perhaps a practice of having a school and the subject of the class, or the school and the grade of the student in the subject line, so that they would immediately know how to sort through that. And so I just wanted to pass that along. I don't want to micromanage, but sometimes the best feedback we get is from our parents. And the second one was the possibility of offering parent video chats to ask questions and get things answered. Some of the parents were finding that doing it over email was proving to confuse things more than it was. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Morse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Ellis, this is an important question because people are very stickly about precise numbers. Now, when Ms. Reeser just brought up the bump, you made the comment that it wasn't necessarily assigned to the final grade, but it was assigned to the average. So let me give an example and see if we can walk through this. A student with a 90 is eligible for a grade bump of up to 3 points if the teacher found they had mastered the material and decided to award all 3 points after a 90 for the first quarter, a 90 for the second, and a 90 in the third. Would that student's average be a 93 at the final grade, or would it be a 91?
Mr. Morse, that's a great question. I will remind you that I was an English teacher, not a math teacher back in the day. I think that's an important question for us to consider as we finalize these guidance documents for schools.
Okay, because I don't know where that 3 points gets applied, and I guess that's the concern, because the slide made it very clear that it was attached to the final grade. So when a student walked in with Q1 through Q3 being 90, reading that slide, it would be my interpretation that it would be a 93 final grade.
While Dr. Ellis was resisting getting into specific number scenarios, we can focus on the more general question about whether or not it's applied to the final grade. Dr. Ellis, I did not hear you say that it's not applied to the final grade. You made a distinction about it is affecting the final grade, correct, Dr. Ellis?
That is correct. It is affecting the final grade.
So that student could have gotten up to 3 points added to their final grade.
Yes, sir.
Perfect answer. Thank you. And the last question I had was concerning Virtual Loudon, Virtual Virginia. Dr. Ellis, we had talked about this earlier. Do you have guidance on limitations that currently exist and whether those are local or whether those are state limitations on the number of courses at Virtual Loudon and Virtual Virginia that our students can take?
So we don't have new guidance. Our current guidance is that students may take up to one additional course or an 8th course each year, and up to 2 courses in the summer.
Is that a Loudoun County policy limitation, or is that a state limitation?
That is a local decision.
Okay, because especially in these circumstances, I think we need to evaluate the intent on that and whether it makes sense to continue moving forward with allowing just one academic credit versus potentially more for students that need to be challenged. Thank you.
Yes, and yes.
Okay, we'll circle back to Ms. Bartz.
So tying in with Mr. Morris, my understanding that Virginia, virtual Virginia is a lot less cost-wise than virtual Loudon, but you can only take virtual Virginia classes if virtual Loudon doesn't offer it. Are we looking at opening our choices for our families more, given that we're looking and now we've seen how important options are for students for distance learning?
So yes, we are looking at all of those questions as part of our plan. I will just add that the virtual Virginia is at a lower cost to parents. That's because LCPS incurs a lot of the costs, such as providing a mentor, textbooks, and additional resources required for the virtual Virginia classes. So there are multiple factors, and that is something that we're looking at.
So we pay a portion of virtual Virginia costs? Is that what you're saying?
No, ma'am, we don't pay virtual Virginia, but we have to provide certain things so that the student can participate in a virtual Virginia course. We provide the resources to the family.
But we don't have to do that with virtual Loudon?
Correct, they already have the resources they need.
Okay. And when will, because virtual Loudon is now enrolling, it's open, when will we know if there is going to be a discount on those courses, if at all? You mentioned that we were looking at affordability. Are we looking at discounting virtual Loudon at all, or no?
We're looking at all of those options, and I don't have a date for when that decision will be made.
When do they have to pay to sign up for classes? When they register?
I'm not sure when they have to pay. I will find that information.
Because registration opened not last night, I think, but the night before.
Yes, it did.
So I just kind of want to make sure we are getting information out. If we're going to make these decisions, I want to make the decisions in a timely manner so that everyone who can take advantage of them, because they saw a lot of those courses fill up, and it would be difficult to then turn around and tell students, you can, oh yeah, we're going to offer a discount, when they would have, it would have been nice to have that information available at when registration's opened. I do have some questions about the mental health rollout. I think maybe this is for Dr. Jones. Are we still doing peer in high school? I know the application process is paused, but are we still actually allowing the peer student process?
Yes.
So peer is still being active in our high schools. Okay, great. What about groups in elementary? Are the guidance counselors still running groups, or what? I'm looking at different mental health programs that we've had in real time, wondering what we're offering through the distance type of learning.
Yes, our school counselors, social workers, other members of the unified mental health teams at the secondary level and also those at the elementary level are supporting teachers and students in lessons and also in groups for social emotional learning.
Okay.
And if there is a need for additional support that is requested by the parent, of course, we're working with the parents in that forum as well with the student.
Okay, because I have questions from parents about their child was in a group and they were trying to understand if that opportunity was still going to be available now.
Yes, and I would ask the parent to contact the school counselor or whoever is leading that group for any specific information. If it may depend on the type of group that was being provided, that may or may not be provided virtually. And it may be more of a support with the individual student along with the parent or guardian. So for specific questions, I would encourage to contact that particular counselor for more specific response.
As far as the peer program at all the high schools, so those, the peer mentors, the students, they are still able to reach out to other students, and they're just doing that through with the adult present or just on their own.
I understand that the school sponsors are still reaching out with their students that are in those student leadership groups.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, because I had questions about that.
Okay, we'll move to Mr. Mahadavi.
I guess I have a follow-up question I wasn't going to ask. I think since, just to clarify from my understanding, Dr. Ellis. So today, I guess there's a cap on how many classes we can take during summer for virtual learning. I think it's one. I think Mr. Morris's question. So is it one per summer, or are we going to relax? You mentioned, are we going to relax that, or is it still going to be one? I guess there's a cap on it, right? How many classes we can take virtual learning?
Ms. Sheridan?
Yes, Dr. Williams.
Dr. Ellis has shared that we're looking at the issue of this. We know it's urgent. There have been a few other things that are taking her attention. And so we will get back to the board. We understand the sense of urgency, but we're not prepared tonight to have the additional discussion on this. And we want to be responsive. We want to emphasize, we get this. This is a topic on people's minds. We're just not prepared to have that detailed discussion tonight. And we know we need to have additional progress on this.
That's fine, Dr. Williams. I wasn't sure what was shared, etc. But I think I was just trying to clarify the question of that. I have a second question, Dr. Williams. Maybe I'll cater the question towards you. I know I signed up for allowing my child to be recorded. Is that recording would be made available to the parents as well, or is this? I mean, or what would the process of the recording be available, or? Again, it's there for protection for both teacher and the child, but is the parents would have access to it, or I don't know. I guess just to clarify, perhaps that's okay too. But just trying.
So we are planning. We have developed. Department of Instruction has developed Google Meet frequently asked questions for parents, and that will be distributed soon. It includes questions like, will Google Meets be recorded? Does LCPS require parental consent? How will the recordings be shared? And some other related questions. And so that information will go out to folks. It does not specifically address the question you raised. So I'll ask Dr. Ellis if there's anything else you want to add at this time, or just take a look at that. But I did want to provide the context because I think that's helpful to know that there will be general information come out about the Google Hangout.
Sure, thank you. So the recordings will be saved to the teacher's Google Drive, and we have asked teachers to keep the recordings for at least a week to provide access to students who don't have an opportunity to be either to be live in the synchronous class. So those recordings would be provided to students. We have in the FAQ, you'll see that the recordings are not to be shared beyond LCPS and the student and their parent.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And I only see Ms. Bart's hand up still.
So this question is for Dr. Williams. At the beginning of tonight, you spoke about different scenarios and moving forward with planning, knowing that we do not have all the information we need at this time to really make any detailed plans, but recognizing that we do have to move forward and discuss what's working and what isn't working. And that involves having conversations, as you said, I believe with with feedback and conversations with stakeholders. I would like to understand a little more about how you envision that. If you're looking at conversations just among you asking various advisory groups and various parents, or are you supportive of creating a general task force or ad hoc that would be able then to hear different things and be able to then offer advice? How do you envision the informal conversation?
So we envision and recognize we're just now shifting. I'm not really aware of any divisions elsewhere that are thinking through as intentionally the contingency planning as we are. So recognize we just started, and we know that the stakeholder involvement will be crucial for refining prototypes. And so a key part is not saving up, saving up solicitation of feedback and input until some big final detailed product. It really is this iterative process so that we can understand stakeholder needs and expectations and behaviors and have that empathy to design our responses effectively. And while the initial prototypes will be simple and incomplete, planning would become more detailed over time, and we envision that occurring through communication with stakeholders. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak further with you about your thoughts about the possibility of a task force. What I want to try to do is make sure we're meeting needs of getting input without creating anything that would be cumbersome, because it may work to have different individuals participate in different aspects of the planning. And so while we have not envisioned necessarily a formal task force, we do envision significant ongoing feedback, and I'd be happy though to have, I'm interested in having further conversations with you about what you and other board members see as possibilities.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think feedback is difficult for the administration to get at times. And I think that it's critical that all stakeholders are represented and can bring to the table what has worked and what isn't working, understanding that we've been in crisis mode, but at some point we're going to have to move forward with certain assumptions. And then if things do not evolve and we are able to go back to school in a normal manner, we still have made plans. So I'm definitely interested in discussing this. I know that the community is very interested in sharing their thoughts. So I look forward to hearing more about how you envision those conversations happening and who you are looking to get advice from as far as your stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to Ms. Corbo.
Thank you. I just had a question, and I mean, maybe just a comment or something to think about. I did have an email from a parent concerned about videos and teaching videos, and that going out to families who could then share that information publicly. And I know that you just mentioned that we'll have a release form for participation. But what if content does get out in a way that is maybe a bullying format, or some making fun of teachers teaching, or making fun of students, or sharing information about students? Is there a consequence or protocol that we'll have in place to protect our students and our teachers when they're putting out this or they're teaching publicly?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Corbo. That's one of the reasons that we are requiring teachers to record the synchronous learning sessions. And your question is actually addressed in the synchronous learning guidance on the continuity of education webpage. There's a specific section regarding student conduct and teacher expectations for synchronous learning. And so the student conduct rules, the student rights and responsibilities apply in synchronous distance learning as well.
And is that also, does that address parents as well, sharing information or content?
No, the student rights and responsibilities does not specifically address parents.
Because parents will have access to the teaching videos, is that correct?
Their students will have access to read them or to review them.
I just know that that's something that we've been contacted about, and I didn't know what we would have in place for protecting our teachers. I know that students have a certain protocol, but this is new for our teachers, putting out their teaching methods and how they're teaching, and which can open them up to criticism from the community and from other parents, and especially if it's shared.
Yes, I think you raised important considerations.
Thank you.
Board members, I don't see any other hands raised. I'd like to thank Dr. Williams and Cabinet for the presentation and for also addressing all of our questions tonight. We'll move to item 4, board member comments. We'll begin with Ms. Reeser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Williams, I want to start by telling you how much I appreciate the research that you clearly have done in trying to develop a roadmap for the potential 3 scenarios and the thought you've given to all of it. And just as the board members played a role as your partners in influencing the factors that you would consider when you decided to close school, and we're looking forward to being partners with you in the decision regarding the scenarios related to the 3 reopening scenarios or any combination thereof. So thank you again for being a leader, for being the first to start thinking about this and planning this, and for giving us the opportunity to work with you as we go forward. As far as my committee reports go, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have a special meeting on Monday in place of the LNP committee meeting to meet with our Loudoun delegation so that they can brief us on the status of things coming out of the reconvene session, as well as a recap of the session that ended previous to the pandemic. Normally, it would have been just a regular committee meeting, but because there are so many issues related to the budget, I did ask Ms. Sheridan to make it a full committee meeting. And as I started thinking about committee meetings generally, I find myself as chair of the LNP committee, finding it difficult to imagine asking staff members or board members to take the risk of coming in person to decide on things that are non-essential. And in fact, if they are essential, they would qualify for the online meeting. And if they're non-essential, I began to wonder whether they would violate the governor's order. And I probably will seek some input from Mr. DeVita on that, but regarding my personal responsibility to other board members and staff members, I will continue only to bring forward issues that cannot wait while the governor's stay-at-home order is in place. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Mahadvi.
I guess I just want to say a shout out to Mrs. Shriver. I know technology, I mean, LCPS has invested a lot of dollars in technology, and especially given some of the news in terms of how LCPS, I mean, with all the challenges that, again, with COVID-19 and what we as the entire school system has gone through, getting the laptops, getting all the procurement done in a timely fashion, and making sure the systems are up and running and are performing best to its ability. So I just want to give a shout out to you for the work that you and your staff do. So, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. We'll move to Ms. Corbo.
Thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know about our technology steering committee, that we are still on track to send out a technology survey to our teachers, because it will or could perhaps impact our budget, but we do want to be so mindful of our teachers and the workload that they have now, and to put out a survey to them right now would be a lot. So we're doing the best that we can to come up with a time frame that would best work and for all of us, meet the timeline for the budget, but also not stress out our teachers so much. I do want to this is really for our parents. We have heard, and teacher, parents, everybody, our whole community. I feel like we hear you. We represent you, and we are really bringing everything that you share with us to the board or to the administration, and we're sharing it with other board members as well to get questions answered. But it's hard. It's a long process, and I appreciate everyone who has taken the time. And for Dr. Williams, I know that we've had a lot of pressure from parents saying, it's not fast enough. We need to move faster. But there's so many things to consider, and we appreciate that you have been methodical with your staff and also with us coming up with best protocols for our students. I think as far as learning goes, parents need to know that there is not one size that fits everybody. You don't have to have an IEP. You don't have to be in a gifted program to know that one size does not fit all. And parents need to know that if your child is working harder or over the time frame, it's okay. Just to reassure that student that just do the best that they can. And if it's not enough, there are so many things to engage students. So I think parents just need to know that differentiation piece. Just as long as your child is moving forward and engaging and doing the best that they can, that's all that matters. Teachers will work their magic when they come back to school. So I just want to thank everybody and just to remind parents, it's okay. We're in this together, and reach out to your administration at your school, your teacher, and your principal for individual needs. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Corbo. Mr. Sirotkin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up on my remarks from last week regarding contingency planning. First, I had mentioned in passing that I thought that a board policy on contingency planning and continuity of operations is warranted. The plans themselves would not be policy, as those can and should be iterative, but the requirements governing it should be. For example, the requirement to have a plan in the first place, requiring periodic reviews and updates to the plan, requiring regular testing of the plan either by tabletop or some sort of live exercises, as well as what the minimum required elements of the plan are. For example, inclusion of what triggers plan activation and deactivation, who the responsible parties are, which disaster scenarios the plan would cover, and what educational components such as IEPs, synchronous learning, etc., would or would not be continued during each specific emergency scenario. Given that we're in the middle of a large emergency scenario right now, we may want to consider a phased approach for implementing such a policy, but I feel it's important to get started. So as a first step, I plan to put together a draft concept for this and ask for it to be an information item at our next board meeting. Second, as Ms. Bartz and others have mentioned tonight, it's imperative that we gather good community feedback from stakeholders and community members on our continuity plans to make sure that our potential plans for the fall and our contingency plans in general are as robust and comprehensive as possible. This means including parents, students, teachers, school administrators, members of our advisory committees, and others. As Dr. Williams said earlier tonight, multiple varying groups of stakeholders. I think we need to think as a board about what the most effective format for this would be, either as an ad hoc committee or a task force or some other type of more dynamic feedback mechanism to give us and staff actionable recommendations over the next few months. And I plan for this to be an information item at our next board meeting so that we can receive recommendations from staff on this topic and discuss. It seems like a long time, but we only have almost exactly 4 months from now until the first day of school. And that time is going to go very fast if we aren't intentional at every step along the way. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. King.
Yes, I'd like to mention to Mr. Sirotkin that probably what you want to do with your proposal is make the ConOps an action, a goal, and then the different pieces of it action items, because that keeps it more of that high level as a goal, and then the different action items is not into specifics, but it's giving some measurable steps that we need to take. That would just be my thought. And I want to thank the administration for the long hours they've been putting in and the hard work. And I am so happy that they never decided to do Blackboard as one of our ways of getting out to the students. And I want to do a shout out to all our military. We're in an area that is highly involved with military, and all of those, and even the National Guard, who have been called up because they need to help with this crisis. So a shout out to all of them and their families. My son is one of those, and my grandson. So I wanted to thank them. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Beatty.
I have nothing for tonight. Thank you.
All right, we'll move to Mr. Morse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two quick comments. First, like to put out that we anticipate kicking off some committee meetings here in the next few weeks. And I hope that we're able to do that efficiently and get the word out to the public so that we could get the participation that we need. Secondly, for staff, I do apologize if we end up holding meetings in July, because I know that will impact staff as much as it impacts the board. But I think we're in unprecedented times, and I completely agree with Mr. Sirotkin that we need to have as solid a plan as humanly possible when we expect our teachers to come back in the fall. They need to have that guidance, and they need to have the support as we move forward into whatever scenario we end up executing in the fall. So with that, I do appreciate all the work that staff has done, and I anticipate we'll continue to work together throughout the next several months to make sure that 2021 is kicked off properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fox.
Thank you. I just want to say how happy I am and grateful to Dr. Jones for committing to finding a platform and having outreach to the families of our students with disabilities through parent seminars, as well as a CIAC, making sure the CIAC meeting can be broadcasted so everyone can see concerns and progress. I want to thank Dr. Williams for his webinar. I did watch it, and he shared so much of the positive that we're doing in LCPS as far as our community care, and we see that continuing tonight with Kevin Lewis talking about the 3D printers and the continued meal plan. As far as our committee meetings, as much as I do want to meet, I have a lot that I know we want to do with our committees. At the same time, I am waiting and looking to see what the guidance is from the governor as far as any amendments that he proposes, whether that allows us to move forward with business, regular business, or it must remain, have a relationship with this emergency situation. So I also echo several other board members that I'm looking forward to having a partnership with Dr. Williams and his administration as far as making sure that teachers, parents, students, everyone has a voice as far as creating a forward movement, a plan, so that we learn from what is working and we discuss what did not. And hopefully by the first, second week of May, we can have a plan going forward for how that may look. I appreciate Mr. Sirotkin working on that. So I love that the community reached out about Edmonton and the concerns that they have. And I appreciate Dr. Ellis sharing that she has heard those concerns, that the social studies in content is not being differentiated between our middle and our high school students. And it's creating frustration and stress for those families. And that is not what we want at this time. That's not the purpose when we went with that platform. So it's great to hear that that is going to be talked about and discussed, and hopefully some solutions will be found. Thank you again to the community for reaching out and sharing your concerns with us. As Ms. Corbo always says, we are your voice. We are here for you, and that's our job. Thank you so much, and be safe and well.
Thank you, Ms. Bartz. I'm going to conclude tonight with extending my gratitude, as many of the board members have already this evening. I truly appreciate Dr. Williams sharing the roadmap plan with us and working with him in the future and the administrators. I also wanted to thank all of the teachers who are doing their job in a way that they didn't intend to do it, in a way that they're not necessarily comfortable doing it, and truly extending themselves to provide our students with as much support as they can. And while I appreciate the instruction being done and providing that for our students, I think that the things that have really touched me this week and even over the last couple of weeks are all of the teachers that we see doing the social emotional learning through virtually with their students, and everyone taking a step back and realizing that in-person and personal touch that goes on in the classroom and within our buildings is truly what makes our school communities successful and special. And I know I'm not alone in hoping that we can get back to normal in the near future. But while we aren't in the normal, I really want to extend my gratitude and thanks to everyone, no matter what your role is within LCPS, Loudoun County, and the state, making sure that you know that we appreciate it, everything that you're doing, whether you're feeding our kids or educating our kids or making the plan. We truly appreciate it. So thank you again. So seeing no further business, good night, Loudoun. Stay safe. We are adjourned.